may have noticed there's an epidemic that dwarfs even coronavirus, and it requires a whole different kind of mask. Lying and deception infect business, politics,
I've said it
sports.
for 7 years. I've said it for longer than 7 years. I have never doped.
And yes, our personal lives too. Why does this happen? After all, we like to think of ourselves as good, solid, upstanding people, yet we know we're capable of such incredible deceit and deception. That tension comes from what's called rationalization, how we talk ourselves into making decisions, some of them good, some of them not so good. According to both science and the Bible, our split personalities come out when our good intentions run smack dab into the middle of our deep desire to benefit selfishly from our deceit.
How many people here have lied at least once since the beginning of 2014?
Just ask Dan Ariely. He's an expert when it comes to lying and cheating, not because he's a bad guy, but because he studies human behavior to find out how and why we do what we do. He and his students run hundreds of experiments on the subject. A key finding? As long as we cheat only a little bit, we don't have to pay much of a price in terms of how we see ourselves. Ariely calls this the fudge factor, the ability to misbehave and still have a positive self-image. He points out that we see this all the time in daily life. We know the speed limit, but most of us have no trouble going a bit faster. What about cheating a little bit on taxes with off-the-books income or spending? Or how about exaggerating your resume or online dating profile? What's interesting is that anything that messes with the fudge factor interferes with our ability to be dishonest. It's like we have to be able to justify ourselves, and we sometimes go to incredible lengths to do that. So here are the most common ways in which we excuse ourselves when we're dishonest. Number 1, everybody's doing it. Number 2, nobody really thinks this is wrong anymore. Number 3, nobody will ever know. Number 4, I'm not hurting anyone. Number 5, I deserve this. And number 6, I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing it for, well, fill in the blank. Let's take some of those big ones one at a time, beginning with everybody's doing it.
You can just have a seat anywhere with a packet and a pen in front of it.
Dan and his colleagues have one experiment in which participants are given 20 simple math problems. But nobody gets enough time to do them all. After 5 minutes, they have to stop, count how many correct answers they have, then take their sheets to the front of the room and shred them. They get $1 for every problem they solve.
There you go. Thank you for participating.
What they don't know is the shredder is rigged to cut only the edges of the sheets. And what do researchers find? Most people solve 4 problems and report 6 correct answers. 70% cheat.
I solved 6.
I don't know if this is embarrassing or not, but I got 6.
I believe I got 7 right.
In experiments and in life, big cheaters are rare, but smaller ones are incredibly common. And because there are so many, the cost in dollars and morality is incredibly high. In an average year, the Canada Revenue Agency is cheated out of millions. Insurance fraud is in the billions. Now, everybody is not doing it, but that misses the point. Jesus said, "You can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad, and the gate wide for the many who choose that way. But the way to life is very narrow. The road is hard, and only a few ever find it." We're not supposed to follow the crowd, but lead it. But that will only happen when we understand how sin works. In a nutshell, sin is almost never a single event and almost always an entire process, and we seldom jump right in. But the minute we even consider the possibility of violating our conscience, we've crossed a dangerous line. And then things really ramp up when we start to think about how we might get away with it and how good it would feel to have what we want. James tells us all that in his book. Temptation comes from our own desires which entice us and drag us away, he says. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to separation from God. So, desire leads to thoughts, and thoughts lead to sinful actions, unless we interrupt the process by refusing to even contemplate the sin. But more often than not, we think we're in control. We are convinced that we can dabble and then just walk away whenever we want to or need to. So maybe we start to talk to those who make it easier to justify what we really want, even though we know it's wrong. And before you know it, we're in way over our heads. And then a whole new set of pressures kick in, beginning with the lie that says, I've crossed the line and there's no going back. Besides, people will never forgive me or trust me ever again, so I may as well just keep doing what I'm doing. If it's any consolation, all creatures are equipped for deception. Scientists say the bigger the brain, the bigger the capacity for lying. Chimp leaders sometimes lead their group away from food so they can go back later and have it all to themselves. Researchers also say children lie because it helps them imagine things and gives them pleasure as they assert their independence. But then social norms kick in. How others behave becomes a big factor. So in a test like the first one we saw, an actor is hired.
Yeah, I got all of them. What do I do?
Sure, come up here.
In less than 2 minutes, he supposedly finishes all 20 questions. Everybody knows he cheated to get the $20. So guess what? More people cheated, either because there seemed to be no downside, or people actually felt it was socially okay. But when the cheater masqueraded as a student from a different university, cheating went down. We tend to follow the norms of people like us. So it's not about the likelihood of getting caught, but about what's acceptable behavior in our social circle. So now you know why the Apostle Paul tells us to be careful who we hang out with. The very first psalm has an interesting take on how somebody tempted to do wrong gets deeper and deeper. Notice the steps here. Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. In other words, think about the right things, and you can resist bad advice, especially if you don't spend time with those who are a bad influence or join in. Don't be fooled, Paul says, for bad company corrupts good character. Think carefully about what's right and stop sinning, for some of you don't know God at all. In other words, interrupt the sin process. As for nobody really thinks this is wrong anymore, Romans tells the church, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you'll know God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. And nobody will ever know doesn't cut it because, of course, God will always know. Nothing in all creation is hidden from him, says Hebrews 4:13. Everything is exposed before his eyes, and he's the one to whom we're accountable. To get around that, we compartmentalize. We divide our lives into these little boxes: work, church, home, besetting sin. And we don't let any of those boxes have anything to do with the other boxes. Men are especially good at that, and it reminds me of the little boy who closes his eyes and assumes his father can't see him because all he sees is darkness. But it's a common mistake. Social science tells us the more we lie, the easier it gets to lie more and tell bigger ones. Our consciences are elastic, and after a while it's not even a stretch to lie. That's because our brains and consciences work with a baseline. If we're essentially honest and we lie, that's a big deal. But practice makes perfect, even when lying. After a while, the negative feelings just go away. Ariely asked 12,000 golfers if they'd cheat.
Would you pick it up and move it 4 inches? And people said, heaven forbid. You understand the nature of the game, how people feel about it. Nobody would do that. Fine, nobody does that. What about kicking the ball? No problem whatsoever. What about hitting it with a club? It's even easier. And you know what's the easiest? If you're not looking. Like, you look up and then you kick a little bit. But I think you can feel the intuition that if you pick something up and you moved it, the act would feel incredibly deliberate. But if there was some distance, you kicked it, something happened, all of a sudden this distance would allow people to have a bit more ambiguity in the connection between them and the final act.
Back to the experiment. When people finished the math questions and got tokens to change into dollars, cheating went way up because it felt like they were lying to get pieces of plastic, which didn't seem to matter much. The money was at a distance. It's the same when people cook the books and get the money later. We play those games all the time because it feels better if we just minimize the sin. And that's where some of those other common excuses come in. The "I'm not hurting anybody" defense is lame because somebody almost always does get hurt when things go wrong or we get caught. Besides, such thinking puts us at the center of everything. It's all about what we want, when the Bible says, "Don't be selfish, be humble, thinking of others as more important than yourselves." And instead of focusing on what we think we deserve, we need to replace that sense of entitlement with gratitude, both for what God gives us and for what He doesn't. He has filled my life with good things, the psalmist says, but He doesn't punish us for all our sins or deal with us harshly as we deserve, for His unfailing love is great. And doing wrong for the sake of somebody else doesn't make the act any less sinful, whether it's a matter of commission or omission. James says, remember, it's a sin to know what's right and then not do it. This is a bit off topic, but Ariely ran one experiment in 2 bars where first bankers and then politicians hung out. Guess which group cheated most? The bankers cheated twice as much. Now you know. But more to the point, the researcher went to the University of Southern California and asked 500 students to write down as many of the 10 commandments as they could remember. Almost nobody got all 10.
By the way, they invented lots of interesting ones.
And they were given the opportunity to cheat. But nobody did, regardless of their religious beliefs.
In fact, even when we take self-declared atheists and ask them to swear on the Bible, they stop cheating.
Ariely ran the same test at MIT among students who were asked to sign an honor code before the experiment, even though the university doesn't have one. And again at Princeton, which does have an honor code and gives all students a crash course in morality.
When they did not sign the honor code, they both cheated to the same level. When they signed the honor code, none of them cheated.
The takeaway? Reminding people of their moral code does change the way they behave, and that has huge implications for the church, whether it's teaching children God's code of love and humility, or gathering for Bible study and worship to remind ourselves of who we are, what we believe, and what that looks like in everyday life. The bottom line is that fear of getting caught will never lead to lasting change, but learning to know and love God, and those making the journey with us, will transform us by shaping and reinforcing our values, priorities, and character. It's not what you know, but who you know that matters, with a capital W. Life will just be a whole lot easier and richer if we avoid deception and stay on the straight and narrow with those who love us. Honest.